So after what seems to be an endless wait, Foundation is back. Apple TV's huge sci-fi drama is back with the first episode of its second season. It's been a while and I love this show, and it did help initially start my channel and get the ball rolling, and I did cover all Foundation Season 1, and the link's in the description for that if you want to watch it, or at the end of the video as well. Now, before I get into the episode, I will give you a spoiler warning, but first of all, just to say thanks for taking the time to choose to watch this video. I really appreciate it, and if you haven't done it already, subscribe to the channel. So Season 1 of Foundation left us with some pretty huge cliffhangers. The Foundation was on the run, the clones had been altered forever, and Gal finally meets Salvor, who turns out to be her daughter. And the first episode of Season 2 picks up where it left off, so that's 138 years after the first episode of Foundation. So everyone's now on the same timeline. Gal and Salvor need to flee Synax and find what's left of the Foundation and maybe try and avoid the next crisis. And in this episode, the clones are dealing with more than a few crises of their own and a few changes, but I'll talk about that later on. And the episode picks up literally where the last one left off. First episode does help to fill in a few blanks with what's been going on and help catch the audience up, because again, it's been a while since Season 1. And psycho history changes forever in this episode here in ways that I never imagined. A new crisis is coming, so let's get to it. This is your spoiler warning. So it opens up with Harry, and I wasn't initially sure which version of Harry it was. He's rambling about Gale, and I wondered when this was as well, because it could be the complete far-flung future. I didn't know if they were initially going to do the sort of dual timelines that they'd done in Season 1. But it is set in the present, and we do find that out later on. But this version of Harry seems lost physically and mentally. We see flashbacks to his childhood and we meet people from his past, and I definitely think this is setting up visiting his home planet. They did tease it in Season 1, but they never got there. And we've seen a few shots of Gal and Salvor on this planet with all these children, so I think that is going to be Harry's home planet of Helicron. But I also like that we're seeing his backstory. His dad's not the nicest guy, put it that way.
I paid for that book.
And I'm looking forward to seeing if they carry this over and we find out how he became the man that he was, because he's dead, remember? But this Harry has been trapped, and I wondered who by. Was it the clones? Is he inside the Prime Gradient? Is it both? Maybe neither? We see him talk to an old flame who he calls his life mate, and whatever this is, it clearly isn't part of his plan. Now, part of my brain did go off and go, is it the mule? Is it the mule? And I thought, no, not yet. They're not going to bring the mule in yet. But it's kind of hinted at that Gal might be behind this, as Harry calls her his tormentor. Gal wants to deviate from Harry's plan at some point. But then there's a reveal that it's not his old flame, but a fellow mathematician / nemesis. But it turns out it's neither of those, it's the Prime Gradient itself. So this version of Harry is in the Prime Gradient, and the Prime Gradient has become self-aware with all the information that it has. And this is a huge twist and another thing that's not in the book. Also, like the clones, it's a great way to tell a story. I'm really happy about how they done this and how they pulled it off and what it could mean for the show.
What a twist!
So the Prime Gradient is now working with Harry and guiding him, who in turn is working with Gale and Salvor and guiding them, hopefully. But yeah, what happens if the clones do get hold of the Prime Gradient? What are they going to do about that? I can see that being a possibility and probably happening, and them trying to imprison, trap or torture Harry to get information on how to change the future and save themselves. We've seen scenes of Harry talking to the clones, and I think this is pretty good idea of where it's going, but I want to know what you think, so let me know in the comments below. Are you happy with the Prime Gradient becoming self-aware? What do you think that's going to mean for the show? Now, picking up from Season 1, Gal and Salvor are in Synax, and Gal's just found out she's got a daughter, and that was the cliffhanger from Season 1. As Gal's been in stasis, Salvor is now older than her, and Salvor is having the sort of same visions as her mother. So I wonder where they're going with this, with sensing the future and sensing the past, and how that's going to affect Harry's plan and psychohistory, especially now psychohistory's a person. And they both discuss it. Salvor dreams of the past as Gal sees the future, and that is essentially the basis of psychohistory. So are they setting one or both of these guys up to sort of be a rival to Harry or have an alternative plan? I think that's probably where they're going to go with Gal, to be honest. And Gal parallels the fall of Synax to the fall of the Empire, that the floods rose gradually. And I think that's a great, one here. Again, it's a slow burn, and this show is a slow burn, although the pace in this episode really does pick up. But yeah, we find out it was Gal who's trapped Harry in the Prime Gradient, and it seems she's going to go against Harry's plan at some point, and he's been locked in there for 138 years, remember? And because they've both been in stasis and trapped on this planet, they don't know if the fall has happened or how far along it is. They see the second crisis is coming, but don't say what it is, only that it's going to be a lot bigger. Gal explains that this is a tipping point, and if they don't solve the second crisis, it'll have a domino effect, making the next crisis and the one after that worse and worse, to the point of Harry's plan might not actually work. They managed to repair Salvor's ship, but remember, 138 years have passed, so everyone that Salvor knew is long dead, most likely. And Gal is in the same situation, and they do bond over that, only having each other, and the fact that they're the last Synaxians as well. Now here's where the episode sort of twists a little bit. They need Harry's help to repair the ship, and Harry isn't happy at all with Gal and how she's entrapped him. And I didn't expect it this soon for them to reconnect, because it was so staggered throughout episode 1. So yeah, they definitely are picking up the pace here. But what did you guys think about the Prime Gradient becoming sentient and how they're going to deal with this? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, it isn't the Foundation without the Cleons, so we catch up with the clones. And this version of Brother Day is getting on very well with Demerzel. And this is another thing that I didn't see coming, no pun intended. But I guess they're adding a new dynamic to her relationship with at least one of the clones. And anyway, while this is all going on, they're attacked. She's really damaged and Day wins. But the fact that he's attacked like this so easily and that his aura has been sabotaged, things can't be going well for the clone. And this was a great fight scene. We didn't get anything like this in season 1. So again, it shows that this show is going to be bigger in scope and pace, and it's going to be bloodier as well, because this definitely had a John Wick feel to it. And I also noticed that Demerzel calls Day Cleon, and I don't think she really done that in the first season, so that is a sort of interesting change in the dynamic. But this version of Day seems to be on the back foot, not trusting anyone, or having the sort of type of power that the previous clones had in the first season. And this is all from the genetic changes cliffhanger, and you can tell the changes that the Rebels made in season 1 are now well in effect. This Day isn't as well composed, he's more emotional, and the current Brother Dawn mentions about the genetic changes as well and how it's affecting them as individuals and the dynasty. And there are huge changes. This Day is hugely different. He sort of wants to start his own family/dynasty, which is totally against any behaviour we've seen from the clones in season 1. They didn't act as individuals in this way. This is part of a sort of greater plot plan, or is it? I can see that this Day is probably going to deviate quite heavily from the behaviour that's going to be expected. So he's suspicious that his brothers might be behind the attempt to kill him to stop the marriage. But the difference in these characters is huge. They are completely brand new. You don't know what to really expect with this Brother Day, because one minute he seems like the old version you're familiar with, and the next minute he's just completely off the wall. And Demerzel also seems to have a real hold over this Day, so is she playing the clones against each other? I don't know. And Dusk isn't happy about Day's and Demerzel's newfound relationship, and the whole marriage thing to Queen Seraph, that really also seems to be a sort of power build and power play for Brother Day as well, and is definitely something that's going to divide the clones. I think the marriage is probably just being set up to help Brother Day or the Empire build their forces, and this shows how far they've fallen if they need to reach out for help like this. Day finds out who tried to kill him but not who ordered it or who helped him, so he's suspicious of everyone around him and starts to turn on his own people. So yeah, he's very suspicious of everyone, and the wedding isn't set in stone yet. This means the alliance isn't forged, and Day's new bride sees the cracks in the Empire and lets him know. But all of this is interrupted when Demerzel tells Day about the investigation into the Foundation in Terminus over 100 years ago, because there's been an update. They find a message sent from Terminus letting them know about the Invictus and that the Foundation is still out there, and essentially what happened at the end of Season 1. So they know that they've got the Invictus and that they're up to something, but as it's been over 100 years, they can't work out why there hasn't been some sort of event or attack. Demerzel says she has heard about a blooming alliance on the edge of space, and they work out that it must be the Foundation. Now what's clever is they don't want to tip their hand, so they act as if it's business as normal so as not to alert the Foundation or Harry that they're aware of them. Now, you remember there's another version of Harry on the Vault back on Terminus, and this has started to reactivate. It seems that some people, we guess this is probably elements of the Second Foundation, have been on the planet waiting on it for 138 years, for the next piece of Harry's plan to emerge, and for him to emerge as well. But I guess Empire is on its way. We've seen Day on Terminus in the promo material that's been released already. And that's pretty much the entire episode. I loved this episode. The opening fight scene was letting us know that this is going to be war, and this show is taking it up a level. Season 1 was criticised for being too slow, and quite rightly so. There wasn't any real action sequences in it, and it seems that they've heard what the fans have to say. The first season was a victim of the pandemic, and they never really got the chance to show the world they wanted. And you can see, literally at times, it looks like a much bigger budget show in this episode already, and it's got some big ideas that it's going to have to pull off and execute well. And I really think that this show can do it.
Gail. Yeah.
So it's the second episode of the second season of Foundation. As always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review, and I'm going to be doing a bit of non-spoilery stuff before I get into the episode, so I'll give you a warning before I get to that. But first of all, just to say, thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, just click it, and if you make it all the way to the end, click like as well. Picking up again where it left off last week, or at the end of the last episode, this one is really setting up what's going to come in the next season, or at least the next few seasons if the show gets renewed, and I mean, it's setting up a lot. Gal's visions are playing a big part in this and in psychohistory and how it affects it. They need to focus on the Second Foundation, and we see how Harry's emergence from the Vault has affected those over the last 100 years or so. But there's something or someone, or at least a couple of names in this episode I didn't expect to see get brought up so soon. I expected to hear one or see one in season 2, but the other I was kinda shocked that they're bringing us there that quickly. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. We also see how the First Foundation has interpreted the work of Harry, and how maybe not everyone is fully on board with the way that the Foundation is getting run at the moment. And I think that's going to be a huge plot thread in this season. We're going to see a lot more of how this organisation has evolved and where it's going. And that, of course, all depends on who leads it. But anyway, let's get into the episode. So as I said, it picks up exactly where it left off last week, with Harry, with Gal and Salvor having escaped after a century locked inside his own work. He's understandably a bit pissed off, and that's not just because he's on Synax. He was conscious the entire time, so he was awake 24/7, or at least however long a day lasts wherever he is. Gal tells him that the plan is off course, and he says it's because the Second Foundation hasn't started yet. Remember, that was all supposed to be set up and it was revealed at the end of Season 1, but it's been 100 years since and they're lagging behind, and that's why things are off course. Salvor, of course, knows who Harry is because she met the other version at the Vault on Terminus, but he doesn't know her because I said it's another version. So things are over 100 years behind with the Second Foundation, and no one is really where they're supposed to be with the second crisis looming. They still need to repair the ship before they can leave the planet, and Salvor heads outside to unblock the engine. They manage to escape Synax, and Salvor wants to get things back on track, but they're decades away from being anywhere near Terminus, and without having a jump-capable ship, it's going to take them quite a while to get there. We find out in this episode that the Second Foundation was supposed to adjust the course of the Empire as they'd have access to all of Harry's plan, whereas the First Foundation would be kept in the dark. Harry finds out about Salvor's visions as well and decides to use her to glimpse some of the past and try and correct things. Harry also wants Gal to use her powers to help deal with the second crisis by looking into the future. So they create a near-death experience to help Gal challenge her powers. She sees a planet under attack and she's being chased by someone who knows who she is. He's calling her by name and also mentioning the second foundation. And this guy seems pretty powerful. And they just get it out the way and say that it's the mule. Now, if you haven't read the books, that won't mean anything to you, and I'm not going to get into it too much because it might ruin some things. I knew this guy was coming because he's a huge arc in the Foundation series, but I didn't think we're going to get him this soon. The guy is like a huge threat, and he's going to have the same abilities as Gal and more. Because his arc doesn't really come along till later in the book, so it seems that they are going to move up the pace a little bit. And using Gal's ability to see him in the future is a good setup, and it also reassures the book readers that he's on his way, because I tell you, if you've read the book, you're waiting for this guy. When she wakes up from the vision, she even has handprints round her neck. Because, as I said, this guy is insanely powerful. Harry never planned for anyone like this existing, so he's completely outside anything that they can expect. Now we get a new planet in this episode, Enna, on the Outer Rim as well, and a new character, Brother Constance, and is a follower of the Foundation spreading the words of the Prophet. That, of course, is Harry Seldon. And it seems that in the last 100 years it's become a sort of semi-religious movement. It's a kind of great way to spread the word, but also it really reminds me of that story arc in Dune. Let's say some people have interpreted the events at the end of Season 1 as some sort of foreshadowing that's going to save humanity, which it sort of is. This planet has been abandoned by the Empire and the Foundation want to help it with their knowledge, and the fact the Foundation can operate like this without the Empire noticing means that their reach isn't near as big as they'd like to think it is, or they'd like others to think it is. Anyway, using some of their tech to fool the locals, they convince them and use it to tell the story of how the Empire abandoned them and basically what's going to happen next. So it seems that the vault opened on Terminus over a century ago has inspired people all across the galaxy, and these two are trying to spread the word in their own style. And speaking of the vault, they receive a message to say that it's opened again and this second crisis is on its way. And people have been waiting decades for this and Harry's return. It seems that he's more like a Jesus Christ character than an advanced computer program at this point in the story, at least for certain people. One thing that I did notice is when they jump back to Terminus, they seem to have advanced technology as they don't need to be asleep to jump. So it seems that the Foundation is thriving. Now, the other guy that I've not mentioned yet is the child from Season 1 who met Harry the first time he emerged from the vault, Polly Versov, and he's the only surviving person to witness the events at the end of Season 1. So once they get back to Terminus, we find out that some division in the Foundation and how they've been doing things for the last 100 years. Polly's a little bit upset that he doesn't have a bigger seat at the table, as he is the last surviving member of the original Foundation, and that he thinks they might not be on the road that's intended, they might be making the same mistakes that the Empire's made. The Warden of Terminus enters the vault and is lifted up by some sort of energy field before shouting for Hobor Mallow. Now again, a huge name from the book, and I'm not going to get into this at all because obviously it's going to come up in the next few episodes and it's going to be a side quest for people to track this guy down. But yeah, along with him and the mule, they've really introduced a lot of big things in this episode. And I do like that they carried the character of Polly over. That's not something that I would have expected. I did think, would anyone be alive from the first season? And I didn't think that they would do it. But, you know, they have, and well done, it worked for me. Now, back on Trantor, Day is contemplating his legacy and still looking into the assassination attempt from last week. And he still has marriage on his mind to Queen Seraph. And of course, keeping his throne. And they're still looking into what's happened with the Foundation as well, and as I mentioned, the fact that the Foundation are on the move and we see them actively recruiting throughout the Outer Rim, it's only a matter of time before the clones realise what's going on and see them as a threat. I did mention in my last video if the clones had done anything to sort of negate or counterbalance the changes to their DNA over the last 100 years, and we sort of see in this episode that they've taken steps to do that. There's a woman who's sort of like a coordinator to make sure they've all got the same mannerisms and move the same way and say things at the same time. I can't tell if she was advising off of one of them or she's just watched a lot of maybe old videos of old clones and based it on that, but it's not really important, I suppose. Because this is all sort of been set up for the dinner between the in-laws and the outlaws kind of thing. And Queen Seraph, Day's future wife, doesn't pull any punches. She's very direct and also a little bit sneaky. She says that she doesn't really see them as people, more copies of something that can be replaced, referring to the clone backups that they have, and we do see it in this episode as well. She points out that the idea of the marriage between her and Day goes against the very idea of the dynasty. And she also mentions that she only ended up being in her position of power after an accident. So I do wonder if Day set that up because that's the person that he'd be most, compatible with. I want to hear what you guys think about that. Was he behind that? Because I can easily see Brother Day doing something like that. Let me know in the comments below. She also mentions what would happen if she had a child with Day and how this would end the dynasty, as the next one in line, Brother Dawn, would never ascend to the throne. Now, it looks as if she's been doing her homework on the Empire, because when Day takes her to see the original Cleon clone in the backups, she assumes that Demerzel is exactly the same and in the same boat because she never ages. And they've not really looked in or mentioned the robot thing too much. I know there's a rights issue with the Asimov estate in the show, so they can't go into it, but I wonder how they're going to adapt this, because they haven't focused on Demerzel much this episode. But yeah, she's definitely sussed out at least what Brother Day's about. I don't know about the other two. And it seems that he's given up a lot more than she is for this to happen. Now, I said she's been looking into the clones, and in the last 100 years, apparently the fact that their DNA has been corrupted is at the very least a rumour. So someone is talking or plotting, because we know that plots have gone on against them for decades, so why not a century? And I think it's only a matter of time before the brothers Cleon turn on each other, because if it crosses one of their minds, it at least should occur to the others, because I know they're different, but they're still kind of the same person. It could also be that once they see the Foundation as a threat, it unites them as well, but I think Seraph and Day are kind of going to try and do their own thing and wipe the other two out. But I want to hear what you guys think about that as well, so let me know. Now, the episode ends with Gal revealing more of her vision because they've worked out where they need to go next, and she tells her that she's seen Salvor in the future die with her. Now, we know that Gal can predict the future, we just don't really know how far she can change events.
Use it.
Sorry, what?
So we got the meal introduced last week, which was a bit of a shock for the book fans, to be honest, and there's a lot more of it this week. I'm talking about Foundation Season 2, Episode 4. As always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review, so let's get to it. And I know from reading the comments and social media that a lot of people weren't happy with last week's episode, and I bet they won't be happy with this one either, as we get a lot of changes to the story from the books. We get introduced to a few new characters that have been teased for a while, Bel Rios, Hober Mallow, and we get a game-changing, change for Harry, Gal and Salvor. And I knew some of this was coming, but I wasn't sure what to expect, and I'll get into that. But before I do, just to say thanks for choosing to watch this video. If you haven't done it already, please subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to see a longer version of this video, you can on my Patreon, and I'll be posting longer form videos as well as early releases there as well. So if you do want to hit subscribe, or you do want to become a Patreon, the link's in the description. But anyway, let's get into the episode. Gal and Salvor are still on their ship searching for a home for the Second Foundation. They're talking about Gal's visions of Salvor dying about 100 years in the future. But as every one of Gal's visions have come true so far as Salvor's concerned, it's going to happen. And Harry's pretty much on board with this as well. Gal's the only one who thinks it can be changed. So they land on the planet, which is an ex-Imperial mine, but it's not the planet that Gal was expecting. So Harry's keeping things from her again, and again, of course, she's not pleased. And I really think that they might be setting Harry up to be the villain in this season, but I'll get to that later on. He says there's somewhere over the planet, and we get a bit of backstory on the planet and how the Empire used it and abandoned it. So Gal takes him, and Salvor stays with the ship, the Beggar. They venture out over the planet, and we get a bit of backstory on the planet and how the Empire used and then abandoned it. And these two aren't really getting on this season. Harry says Gal shouldn't try and convince Salvor that the future can be changed. He sees it as a waste of resources, that they need to try and change a lot, and they don't even know where to start. And I think this might be the dividing point in how they use psychohistory, or how they see it differently. Harry sees it more of a guide, and Gal is starting to see it more of a tool. Harry tells her about his ex-partner that we meet in episode 1. Harry stays in the temple and Gal gets locked out of the room. He tells her to leave if she doesn't hear from him in 6 hours. So Gal goes back to the ship to tell Salvor what's happened, and they talk about how the hologram isn't the real Harry. After all, he's 100 years old, so he has changed. They decide to leave the planet after waiting, and when they try and take off, the ground collapses beneath them, and there's a huge sort of robot spider digging machine, and it all gets very Star Wars in the chase sequence, except it wasn't. Once they get off the ground, they watch them head towards the temple where Harry is, and they scan the caves and detect a life sign. Gal's convinced it's Harry, but how? Somehow he has become flesh and blood again, at least it seems so, and Gal watches as Harry's ex disappears back into the temple as the spider things start the attack. So she does manage to save Harry, and we've got Harry back, and a real Harry, but what does this mean? But will we get an answer for any of this? Because it's got huge implications for the show. And I think a lot of book fans aren't going to be happy with this. That's why I decided to start the video with it. But we do have Harry Seldon back, or at least a version of him. So will we get an answer to any of this? I don't know, but this has got huge implications for the show. And I think a lot of book fans won't be happy. But we do have Harry back, at least a version of him. The only reason I say that is, remember, this guy's technically over 100 years old and knows the Foundation is off plan and behind. As far as we know, the Vault Harry doesn't know this and is operating as if the second Foundation is on track. No, maybe he hasn't appeared in over 100 years because he knows it's off track. What do you think though? Let me know in the comments below. And I definitely think they're setting up two sides to the Foundation, with this one side being Harry and the other side being Gal. Salvor isn't the genius that her mother is, and remember, when she seen the Prime Radiant in season 1, she didn't understand it. But I guess we're going to need to know what happens in the caves. But anyway, once you've got over that shocker, back on Terminus, the Foundation is reacting to last week's vault opening. They can't believe the vault killed the Warden on purpose, but Polly did warn them that they might not be sticking to Harry's ideas. They do wonder how the Vault knew how to call someone called Holborn Mallow 100 years after it was created, which is a pretty good question. Polly seems to be the only one not bothered by any of these events, and he fully trusts in Harry's plans and predictions. He really wants to help save humanity, so he wants to find Holborn Mallow. And they know who this guy is. It turns out he was an ex-part of the Foundation sort of religious order. Before getting forced out, as he was more a grifter than a believer, which, to be fair, isn't far away from what they are. As the setup goes, Holborn is trying to gift a planet called Corel when we first meet him, and his reputation seems to precede him even there. He's kind of doing the Emperor's New Cloak sort of thing, trying to sell a teleporting device that doesn't actually work. But the twist is that it does, and he uses it to steal a jewel called the Eye of Corel. But he does get caught pretty much straight away, just as Polly arrives on the planet in time to save him from his execution. And at first he doesn't seem that fussed about his impending doom, but I did think this is a guy who always has a plan for a plan in case the plan fails. And it turns out I was right. He switches again with the leader of Corel before his execution, pulling a fast one and escaping. And they're definitely setting this guy up to be the Han Solo of the show. Polly realises that Holborn might go after their ship because he knows it's jump capable, and they manage to get on board before he escapes. Now, it did seem like a lot of trouble, but they do have him on board and they're on their way back to Terminus. And we get another new character this week as well, General Bel Rios, who's been referred to in the last few episodes. So he's basically an ex-general that's fallen out of favour with the Empire, particularly Brother Day, and has been sent to a penal colony. This is where we find him, where prisoners are working in the field as Demerzel arrives, and she basically says what she's there for. And Bel Rios is a very interesting character because he knows how valuable he is. He actually tries to negotiate with Demerzel for the rest of the prisoners' freedom, but they talk him down to just better conditions. And this guy isn't afraid of the brothers Cleon, but we find out that they've hidden leverage against him. Bell thinks that the Empire killed his husband, but Demerzel tells him that he's still alive. So they might keep someone like this as a pawn to use against them at a later point, which seems to be what's happening. But anyway, Bell agrees to her deal, and I don't think that Day is going to be able to keep this guy under control long term. Like Queen Seraph, Bell isn't afraid to show that he isn't afraid of the Cleons, and once he gets to Trantor, Day brings him up to speed, letting him know that they found the Foundation on Sowina and want him to look into it further. And Day's figured out quite a lot. He's managed to work out that Harry wanted to be banished to the far reaches of space to build the Foundation, and they don't seem to be worried about that, at least in public. But Bell does ask to do something that we haven't seen before, and that's to be alone with Brother Day. And when they are on their own, Bell really goes at this guy. He knows that Brother Day's weakness is ego and vanity, and that the Empire can't look weak or stupid. This guy really gets what's going on, and I wonder if long term he's going to switch sides once he realises the scope of the Foundation and what they're up to. And you can tell that Bell really thinks that this is all a game and that his husband is dead. But they do have his better half who looks okay compared to Bell. And Bell breaks down, and I didn't think this would happen, to be honest, but it proves that the Empire can get to you and the ones that you love. They done it with Azura in Season 1, and this seems to be a theme with these guys. As I mentioned earlier, it shows that they plan ahead, keeping Bell's husband alive in case they had to use him again against him. And while I like this, I did think a lot of the Bell stuff and some of the scenes could have been a little bit shorter. But while this is going on, Day and Demerzel have been watching Bell and his better half, and they discuss why they recruited him. But this is the real interesting scene in this episode for me, is Demerzel reassuring Day. Because this feels like it could sort of lead to the downfall. She's literally programmed to be a yes man, and he's going to listen to her more than anyone. So there is a theory that Demerzel is behind the attack and the genetic stuff that's going on with the clones. I don't know if I'm fully subscribed to that yet, but you can also fully subscribe to this channel as well and let me know what you think. But Bell certainly seems to be a popular figure among the troops, and his husband encourages him to use that against the Empire. Bell explains to him that being loved makes him useful to the Empire and that he can better change things under them than trying to fight them, essentially. But he's back in power and is on the hunt for the Foundation. Now, I don't think Day's going to let this dog off the leash without some insurance, so I assume that some of Bell's crews are plants or at least loyal to Empire. But we'll have to wait and see. But what we do see is they're sending quite a few ships out on this adventure to look for the Foundation, so expect a few big space battles to come. And that's about it. I really liked this episode despite the changes. They took a break from all the Cleon wedding stuff with Queen Seraph that they gave us last week, and we got some new characters that had been teased over the last few episodes. Bell's backstory and relationship with Empire seem like they are going to be very interesting, and I wonder where they're going to take this guy. Will he reason with the Foundation when he finds them, or is he just going to wipe them out? Or as I said, is he going to maybe join them? He seems smart enough to know when he's going to back a winner when he sees one, and he really is one of the few people who can clearly see that the clones aren't as strong as they project that they are. Now let's get to Hobor Mallow. I was kind of worried that's how they were going to do this guy, as the sort of roguish, well, let's be honest, Han Solo. In one way it wasn't what I was expecting, in another it was completely what I was expecting, but I was hoping that the character would be a little bit older. Now, I'm not going to talk too much spoilers about these guys in the book if you haven't read them, but Hobor particularly is going to be an absolutely huge deal, and if you don't like him now, you're probably not going to like him later on. But as always, we're going to have to wait and see. Now, the big takeaway from this episode is we've got a live-action Harry Seldon back, and yeah, I get why you're not happy with that. It's okay, leave it in the comments. And I get why they've done this from a story point of view, because if you've got Jared Harris, you use Jared Harris.
Now, your trumped-up religion can get itself another human sacrifice.
last week's literal cliffhanger, Foundation had a lot to live up to with a new live-action Harry, and a lot of questions and a lot of fans of the books unhappy. So as always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review. I'm going to be talking about Foundation Season 2, Episode 4, so if you haven't seen it, this will contain spoilers. So this week doesn't focus on that ending at all, but instead gives us a much better look at how the clones live their lives and what their motivations and wants might be. Could that be used against them or to turn them against each other? I think this is going to be a big question looming over the dynasty of what exactly will contribute to the fall of these guys, and how much of that could come from internal conflict. And Seraph does play a major part this week after being absent last week, and is really probing a lot of the Cleons to try and get the answer she wants. We don't get Flesh and Bone Harry back this week, but we do see a version of him when Hobart gets to the vault, and we also get some info on where the Foundation is at and what the Vault Harry kinda thinks of them.
You look like a man who has built himself a mountain to stand atop. And such a fine suit as well.
He's not a fan of the director, put it that way. But before we get into the episode, just to say thanks for taking the time to choose to watch this video. I really appreciate it, and if you haven't done it already, please subscribe to the channel. So the episode opens up with Polly and Constance with a narration of Gal talking about unique pairings, so that can mean a few things in this show. But they're taking Hobart back to Terminus, who still isn't on board with Harry's plan, and I did wonder, how is this guy going to be welcomed back? Some of them will know him, but despite their opinions, he's clearly somehow part of Harry's plan. Anyway, Constance sort of gets to know Hobart before they land, and yeah, they're definitely doing the Princess Leia Han Solo vibes. Is it just me? I'm going to talk about it later on as well. She's definitely very good at reading people after years of going to different planets and sort of pitching the Foundation's mission. And that does come into play later on in the episode. It says that the Faith never reveal their real name. And part of this is, I'm sure, to do with the fact that you've got to leave behind your old life and your old identity, like many sort of religions and faith do. But also, there's a security aspect to it as well, because if they get caught, they're not really going to know who they are. We also find out the director of the Foundation is brother Constance's dad, which was something they should have brought up earlier on. It did seem a little bit weird that they put this in there, and I wonder what it's going to mean for her and the Foundation. Maybe nothing at all, might just have been a fun fact. But obviously they take Hobart to the vault where his name is still there and he's as shocked as everyone else. Given what happened to the Warden when he tried to approach the vault, he's not too keen to step inside. But he's pulled in regardless, and Constance goes in after him along with Polly. But anyway, they find Hobart, who says he's been there for 2 days, so things seem to work differently in the vault, and Harry kinda explains that later on. The director of the Foundation joins them, and initially I thought, is this some sort of automated trap thing with the vault doing what it does? Because again, it's very random that they're forcing this guy in, but no, it is him. Also, considering how the Prime Radiant looked when we seen Harry in the first few episodes, the way that the vault's represented is kinda dull. But they do find a room with a sort of library style, and Harry Seldon as well, at least this version of him. It explains how the vault works and how it can literally repurpose molecules to become anything that's needed. And I think that's worth remembering. I'm going to get into that in another video. But yeah, as I mentioned at the start, Harry doesn't seem that pleased initially with how these guys have been conducting themselves. He did anticipate the Foundation would become a religion by now, and he does remember Polly from when he originally came out of the vault at the end of Season 1, and he does seem to know who Hobart is as well. He explains that he needs all 4 of them to stop a war, and the director foresees this as part of the Second Crisis, as it basically foretells a war with the Empire. A version of the Prime Radiant is also inside the vault, and I do say a version of it because Harry explains that it's basically a quantum computer that can exist at 2 places at once. And I wonder, is that going to come into play later on, the fact that there's only 2 of these things? What happens if they manage to work out how to destroy one, or Brother Day gets one, that kind of thing? Definitely worth thinking about. So Harry wants to send Polly and Constant to Trantor to literally sell the Foundation, because that's what they've been doing on these outer reach planets. And this is all to slow the oncoming war with the Empire, because I think that this guy knows that the Second Foundation isn't set up or isn't in the position it needs to be, so that's why the war has to get slowed down. He dismisses Theodem and asks Hobart to stay behind, but before he leaves, Polly does ask Harry why the new warden had to die, and the short answer that he gives is he has to be seen as a god, so they need to know what he can do and fear it. But once they're alone, Hobart does ask how the Vault and Harry knew his name, and he says it was a passing ghost that told him, so I wonder what this is linked to. I've got a few ideas, but I don't want to say anything yet. But then Harry mentions some comparisons to him in Hobart's life. He explains the church and the faith won't last forever, and they're not designed to. It's all stuff that works in place at the moment to be part of the greater plan. And with Polly and the faith being the public face, Harry wants Hobart to do something a bit more darker and behind closed doors. But we don't know what that is yet. Hobart emerges from the vault a few hours after the others and tells him about the different mission with Harry, but again, doesn't go into much detail. And Constant is a bit pissed due to the whole Han Leia thing. It turns out she's got a bit of a thing for Hobart, and they really seem to be setting that up quickly, because like the director showing up, it felt really out of nowhere. My favourite section of the episode is Queen Seraph on Trantor, because they've really been keying this character up. And if you watched my episode 3 video, you know I had a few theories on what was happening, and it turns out it looks as if I was right. To start off with, she's got a really different look. I mean, it looks as if she's off for a Saturday night out, but this is all just a ruse. So if you didn't watch my previous video, my theory basically was that Brother Day, or at least one of the Cleons, may have been behind the accident that killed her family and literally forced her into power. And it seems that she seems to think the same thing, so yeah, well done if you worked that out as well. And we've seen how the Cleons have meddled before in Planet's affairs, so yeah, it's not against the realm of possibility. But in this episode, she's not really seen with Day. In fact, he's not in it at all. She's turning her attention to Brother Dawn, who, let's be honest, is always going to be the weakest of the three. And we haven't seen much of Dawn in Season 2, and again, he's noticeably different to Day and the rest of the Cleons that we've seen in Season 1. He's more fluid and relaxed in how he moves and how he talks as well. But Dawn also wants information from her, and he wants to know if she had anything to do with the attack in episode 1. And she's not hiding her intentions with what she wants from him, and I think she really might work out how to turn the brothers against each other, and this episode sort of sows the seeds for that. I can see her feeding Dawn the same way Demerzel feeds Day. And with Dawn being the weakest link, Seraph says that so is she, and that's why she thinks this has all been part of basically Empire to get her empire, which is called Dominion. Work out. And she outright asked Dawn if he was Brother Day, is this a plan that he would have come up with? Because she doesn't know that the clones are now all different and they're no longer, the dynasty that they once were. He says he wouldn't, but how similar are these guys after the contamination at this point? I don't know. Again, she's planting the seeds where she asks him why she wasn't paired with Dawn instead of Day, as they're much more compatible, and you can see that he's really having a think about that too. Now, as I said, Day isn't in this episode at all, but we do get more Brother Dusk as well than we've seen in this season. And like all the Dusks, he's still working on the mural. It turns out that this Dusk has a history with Seraph's aide Ro from when he was Brother Day. You know what they done, they're adults, so work it out. And she wasn't even sure which Cleon it happened with. But she says it jokingly, and yeah, we Ro in this conversation with Dusk as well. They're definitely working both sides against the middle, or both brothers against the middle. And Seraph isn't being super vengeful about this, she's being very tactical and kind of Shakespearean, where she's sounding it all out and setting it all up before she makes her move. Ro and Seraph meet an Imperial guard who wants to help her, but more likely wants to line his own pockets, which is another nod to how the decline of the Empire's happening. Seraph is only interested in what happened to her family, but also wants to know how they survived the assassination attack. So I guess she's going to find out about Demerzel being a robot, because they mentioned that her people have the technology to undo the memory wipes that the clones use in order to keep their secrets. So is she going to use this as leverage over Day or over all the clones or just one of them? Now, the sort of final story in this episode is Bel Rios, who was introduced last week, and we've seen him jetting off to Sowena, which is where this story picks up. He's looking for the Foundation and he realises it's a bit of a backwater planet as the Empire hasn't really been caring about the outer reaches for over a century. And at the start of this episode, Bel is careful, calm and collected. He's not going in with a show of force like the Empire would. And initially I was glad they were showing that side of him, as he's more clever and patient, but that does change later on. Him and his husband go to the surface to meet the informant that was in the population, but before they can, they need to retrieve some cargo that came down with them that's fallen into the hands of the natives, and asking for it back goes about as well as you'd expect. But after all the years in prison, Bel is a changed man and he's a bit rougher, and his husband notices it straight away. He's been used to facing death and violence every day, so he might just be a little bit too much at ease with crossing the line or going over the edge. They find the spy who was watching Polly and Constance's light show a few episodes back, and it turns out he's not a spy, he's just an Empire loyalist who was keeping them up to date on what was going on the planet for all these years. He shows Bel the video and Bel is pretty surprised that they have personal auras, and he also learns of the legend of the Vault and Harry Seldon. So the Foundation is more a rumour at this point. The guy on the planet also tells him that the Foundation seem to have more advanced technology, but Bel isn't going to believe it till he sees it, and I get that. You fight the enemy you know, not the myth or the rumour. But the story doesn't really go anywhere else as the locals show up and Bel executes the guy during an expo dump before they flee the planet and escape. So we're at the halfway point of Season 2 of Foundation, and it sort of feels that way as this is a very middling episode, at least if you ask me. As always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review, and thanks for taking the time to choose to watch this video. I really appreciate it. If you haven't done it already, please subscribe to the channel, and if you make it all the way to the end of the video, leave a like as well. So, episode 205 picks up with the story of the new Harry Seldon and kind of answers the mystery around his return, sort of. And this episode only focuses on the trio and what's going on with them, and on Trantor as well with the clones, and the ongoing upcoming wedding. Look, this episode is setting a lot up for what's to come, so let's get to it. So we get a flashback to the slow ship from Season 1 on its way to Terminus with Harry and Raish. Harry tells him how important his action in killing him will be, and it seems to be that Raish knows the full plan, and this is just before he stabs Harry and before Gal gets off the ship. It then cuts to new Harry aboard the beggar, so I guess he's remembering his final moments back then. But Raish appears to him and tells him he knows Harry doesn't really care about anyone, he only cares about the plan, and people are just sort of data points in the Seldon plan to him, which he has mentioned already a few times in this season. So I guess this is just battling with his conscience because he sacrificed his son, all for the case of the grand plan. But before disappearing, he says it wasn't the first time that it happened as well. So new Harry is enjoying his old body, even holding the knife that he was imprisoned in for over 100 years. But he still doesn't know how he's back or what caused it. But he remembers everything about his life before he died, and as I said, everything that happened after it as well. Gale does say that he's been cloned, but they don't confirm it. It's just the sort of most logical explanation that they can come up with. But Salvor has discovered transmissions about the Galactic Faith and the Foundation, and they've got a pretty good idea about what they've been up to over the last 100 or so years. But they are arriving on the planet Ignis, which was their original destination, and they lose control, crashing the ship on the planet. Salvor thinks it was a trap and goes to find out, while the other two remain on board. And once on the planet's surface, she finds Hugo, who she assumed was dead as it's been over 100 years. If you remember from Season 1, the beggar was his ship, and he says that he's kept in contact with it and used it to track her. Now, the vision from episode 2 in the Mule is still getting discussed, but not in much detail. Harry talks about if they can even change the future to save Salvor, and reminds Gale Salvor is Raish's child as well, so in effect she's Harry's granddaughter. And I never really thought about it that way, that these three are 3 generations of the same family effectively. They see Salvor come back from the forest with Hugo, and Harry tells Gal to hide the Prime Radiant. Because he thinks this isn't Hugo, and he's right. So these are the Mentalics that we've been waiting to see are going to be a key part of the second Foundation's plan. Also, the Mule mentioned them in episode 2 as well during the vision. But once they wake up, they're welcomed by the leader of the group who called them to Ignis. She explains that the planet is a refuge for Mentalics across the universe as they're usually cast out of their own society, and I think that's going to be an obvious setup for the Mule if you've read the books. But even with all their mental powers that all these people have, they still don't know how Harry Seldon is back. And you think given their gifts they're going to work it out eventually. But Harry hasn't told them about the plan or psychohistory, but again, they're mind readers, so they know that the Prime Radiant is important. After she sort of dismisses the trio, the leader of the group does say that the second Foundation won't be allowed to happen, and I think the reason for that is they know that they're going to get used as cannon fodder and soldiers in some sort of war or conflict at least. And given what these people have been through, she doesn't want to put them through anything else, or anything else that might sort of single them out or separate them from the general populace. But yeah, I didn't really expect that, but it does make sense. It reminded me of the Babylon 5 arc with the telepaths. If you've seen that show, you know that they were only created to fight a war in the future, and that seems to be the way that Harry's using the Mentalics as well. Now, as I said at the start of the video, this week only focuses on the 2 stories of the trio and Trantor and the clones. So there's a lot going on here, and we find out how literally the Cleonic dynasty sort of works. We find out that they've got the ability to talk to the original Cleon, but I'm going to get to that in a moment. Queen Seraph still wants answers about her family and what's happened with the attack on Brother Day from episode 1. She only learns that the attack was in Day's bedroom, so she needs to get there to see what happens. Day doesn't really seem suspicious about what Seraph's up to. Like, if he did kill her family, you think he'd come up with a bit of a cover or keep her at arm's length, but he wants her a lot closer. And I think it's going to be a case of careful what you wish for with him. Once she's in the bedchamber, Seraph notices the marks from the attack, and as soon as she's in the room, but she's only there for info, and Day does reveal that he knows about her family history and he works out what she's up to. She says she'll only go ahead with the marriage if she finds out who's behind the attack, because she could be a target going down the line as well. And the fact that Brother Day can't bring the attackers to justice shows again that he's losing his grip and his influence. After Seraph leaves, Demerzel and Day talk about where Seraph's at and that she might have her own agenda. And that's definitely the case, and it is building up to it. In the last episode, it was mentioned that Seraph's aide did have an affair or slept with one of the Cleons about 30 years ago, and we see it in a sort of video flashback or video recording. So this is all sort of about working out what's going on with the memory wipes and the Cleons and what exactly they're hiding. So Seraph works out that they'll never get access to any of the Cleon's memories or edits, but someone would have to treat him after the attack, so they use that angle to try and work out what happened. Now, going back to altering memories, Dusk learns that only Day has the power to do this after the attack, and you can tell Dusk is shocked about this, as things could have happened that he's got no idea about, and that does come up pretty much at the end of the episode. Demerzel assures Dusk that she'll always be there for Empire, but as these guys are getting more separate, I wonder how true that's going to be. I think there's going to have to be some sort of action or decision where Demerzel picks a side, or at very least picks a Cleon. And you can really see the division in the clones coming to the forefront in this episode. Seraph gets the footage of them healing Day from episode 1 and realises that Demerzel's a robot after half her head's missing, because it's kind of hard not to notice. Given that robots have been banned for thousands of years, this is a bit of a shock, and I wonder how this scandal is going to be handled. Is she going to keep it to herself? Is she going to use it to manipulate them? I think that's going to be very interesting. Now, I mentioned that we get a closer look at the dynasty and how it works, and I didn't expect this, and I don't exactly know how I feel about it. Dusk and Dawn go to talk to the original Cleon, yeah, the one that's in the box, and I mean literally talk to him. It seems they can access a sort of memory interface with the guy, a bit like the Vault and Harry, but this guy is just there to provide a baseline for what essentially is going to be every Cleon after him. Once they activate it, the original Cleon says any division against the clones is against his plan, and they should always get on as they're always the same person. Now, they neglect to tell him about the genetic changes to them that's happened over the last century, knowing that he probably wouldn't react well to it and kill them straight away to activate their replacements, which wouldn't make any difference because they're tainted as well. But they don't really get anything that they need from Cleon, so Dusk and Dawn compare the memory files of all the other Cleon clones over the centuries, and they realise that they're missing some information. Dawn is naturally going to have a shorter or lesser file because he's the youngest, but every Dusk should have the sort of same size memory file. I know that different events would happen in their lifetime, such as wars and peace and conflict and negotiations and things like that, but the fact that every Dusk is expected to sort of have round about the same figure proves that the Cleons are stagnating, and that's what's eventually going to cause the fall of their empire. So they know that something has been erased and that none of the other clones have known about it either. And that's kind of where the episode ends. So it wasn't necessarily a great episode, but I don't think it was a bad one. As I said, this is just a small step in the story. The trio storyline of Gal, Harry and Salvor for me is the weakest of the season so far. The mysteries and the politics on Trantor are way more interesting, and I like to see this sort of game playing. I hoped we got this sort of thing in season 1, and I'm glad we're getting it in season 2. They start picking apart the Cleonic dynasty even before the genetic tampering. These guys are all supposed to be the same guy and all supposed to have the same ideas and vision, so that's what's going to cause their fall. Is, you know, it would be like putting the king from 100 years ago of, say, Britain, or the Queen or whoever it was, in charge of modern day Britain. They wouldn't be able to adapt to what society is or what society is becoming, and I think that's a very interesting notion that I'm sure they're going to explore throughout the rest of the season. But we didn't get Bel Rios this week, so we've still to see what his next step will be. And remember, Polly, Constance and Hobor are all off on their own missions too. And I get why a lot of people aren't happy about this season. I understand the criticism. It feels like they're trying to overcompensate for the pacing issues and lack of action in season 1, and they've went a little bit too overboard. Bringing a flesh and blood Harry back, introducing the Mule very quickly and moving the pace far too quickly. It seems as if the show is focusing on the characters that are being affected by psychohistory rather than psychohistory in the plan itself. All this is building to the Empire's fall, and we can sort of see the pieces fitting together or falling apart. It's just working out what's going to go where and when. I think the next season will be the fall of the Cleons, and I really hope that they don't rush that. But while I think this episode was a little unfocused, it could have been tighter. I'm still enjoying this season, and I just wonder how they're going to tie all these stories together given all the time jumps and things that are going to happen. As I said, I'm still enjoying this so far. I just think this has been the weakest episode of the season yet. But as always, these are just my thoughts. I want to hear what you guys think in the comments below. There's been a lot of criticism of this show since season 2 started, and I honestly don't understand why. Differences from the source material, changing things around, you get the idea. As always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review, and I'm going to be talking about Foundation Season 2, Episode 6, which I think addresses a lot of the criticisms that have been thrown at the show. Because this episode goes a long way to answering some of the questions that we've had, as well as setting up others going forward. And Episode 6 really fits in a lot, and I do mean a lot of a lot. We get brought up to speed to where a few characters are at. We don't get everyone, there's no Bel Rios in this episode, but we certainly get more focus on the characters than the plot. Specifically Salvor, who, to be honest, hasn't done much this season, and a pretty extensive look back at Harry's life and what made him who he was. They also clear up what the relationship between the two versions of the Seldons are and explain exactly how it works and possibly where it could go. And for me, this is a Harry Salvor episode at its heart at least. And everyone here kinda gets their time to shine. I don't think that the Hobor bit was exactly necessary in this episode, it was just kinda squeezed in, but that's for another video. But before we go any further, just to say thanks for taking the time to choose to watch this channel. I really appreciate it, and if you haven't done it already, please subscribe and leave a like if you make it all the way to the end. So I usually do a little bit of a preamble before spoilers, but I want to get straight into it as there's a lot of story to cover this week, so let's get to it. So it picks up with the trio, or at least Salvor and Harry, and he's reflecting while watching a storm coming, so you know, symbolism people. Salvor joins them to talk about our unusual dreams. And you've got to remember, given the population's mental powers, dreams are bleeding between people. And there's a lot of questioning about people's actions and people's thoughts in this episode, but I'm going to get to that later on. But essentially, how can you really trust what you think or what you hear on a planet full of telepaths? Tellum, the leader of the Mentalics, who I didn't really talk about last week, looks as if she saved everyone on the planet individually, whether through direct action or just sending out a signal to get them there. And the whole thing about Mentalics being able to influence people's actions and feelings is going to be very important when it comes to the mule. Tellum explains the way that others see Mentalics and that they're either worshipped or feared, which again is going to tie into the mule when they get to that. But she's convinced she wants to keep her people separate and away from the sort of general population of the galaxy and not have any eyes focused on. But given that she can read minds, she knows all about their plan and the attempt at the second foundation. But what's interesting is she gets it from Gale's mind, not Harry's it seems. But Harry tells her about the vision and the mule and everything that's going to happen. And you can tell that that really rocks her world and scares her quite a bit. They also reveal that Gale can see the future, and this is a bit risky because that puts Gale at the top of the sort of abilities on this planet, at least from what we've seen. So Tellum knows about the mule, she knows about Salvor's death, and she knows that Gale and Salvor are, well, mother and daughter, and that does get addressed in this episode as well, the dynamic of the relationship. And she's really using that fear of losing Salvor against Gale here. But when it comes to the relationship, she does say that they don't have the sort of standard mother and daughter bond because of the whole hibernation sleep from season 1 and the fact that they never really met until Salvor was a lot older than Gale. Or at least a little bit. So what that means is there's no real standard emotional connection between them. They didn't have the experiences growing up that most parents have with their children. They've only been together a few weeks at best and they don't really know each other. In fact, Gale doesn't even know it's Salvor's birthday in this episode. But while this is all going on, Harry's still getting used to his new body, and Salvor points out that making him flesh makes him more vulnerable as he could be harmed and he's got something to lose after all rather than just being in the holographic form. They're still questioning about how he's been brought back, but we don't get any specific answers on this. But Harry assumes it's to be a sort of messianic Jesus Christ type character when he rises again, and Salvor reminds him that this has already happened for a lot of people over 100 years ago when the vault opened on Terminus. But yeah, the fact that Harry is flesh and blood, Salvor does indicate that this is to sort of make him realise that people are people, not just numbers or pawns on a board to be moved about. Which I think is something definitely worth thinking about. They also talk about trying to manipulate or change psychohistory because obviously Raish knew the entire plan and knew that his relationship with Gale wouldn't work out. So they haven't really said if you can change the future using it or not if you know a specific outcome. And I wonder if they're going to address that before the end of the season. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. But this is where we do get some answers to the two Harry problem. So this version of Harry revealed that he edited the vault Harry's knowledge, and that he honestly doesn't know that the second Harry exists, the same way that the first Foundation doesn't know that the second Foundation should exist. So Harry is essentially keeping himself in the dark, but Salvor points out that, hey, he's still the same guy and he's still Harry Seldon, so he's going to work it out eventually. And while this is going on, Tellum visits Gale on the beggar, and man, does this woman not like Harry Seldon in the Foundation. She wants to make Gale an offer to take over and lead the Mentalics herself, but she wants to see inside Gale's minds first. And when we get to see how the Mentalics ability works here, it's very Morpheus and Neo in the Matrix, or at least that's how it came across to me. Tellum reveals that she's dying and she wants Gale to take her place because she's worried about the mule and what's going to happen with her people once this guy shows up. So the deal is leave Harry and his plan to save the Mentalics and stop Salvor's death at the hands of the mule, and Gale tells Harry about the offer, and of course he doesn't take it well. I mentioned in my recent video, and check it out if you haven't watched it, there'll be a link at the end, all about the dynasty and the characters mirroring each other, and this is another example of that. Both Tellum and Harry are manipulating Gale for their own ends, and Tellum just isn't manipulating Gale, she's manipulating Harry as well. So Gale and Salvor see Harry take the beggar, or at least so it seems. It turns out that Tellum already has Harry, and this is all a trap. And this is a real Bond way villain of killing him when he's tied to these sort of trunks, submerged, almost. And I did mention in the episode 1 review that we'd probably get more flashbacks of Harry's childhood, and we see a lot of his early life in this episode, his relationship with Yana and how psychohistory was developed. We find out at an early age he could see patterns that other people couldn't. But during these flashbacks, I'll be honest, I was a little bit taken out of it with the makeup that they put on Jared Harris. I would have preferred if they'd used another actor and maybe done something with Harris's voice and put it on there, or sort of mixed the two. It's not ideal, but it's not the worst de-aging and makeup job that I've ever seen in my life, put it that way. So we meet a younger Harry who's just at the sort of, well, foundation of starting psychohistory. There's a little joke for you. And it turns out that not everyone at the university is on board with his work or his point of view, and it's already getting reported to the higher-ups, i.e. Empire. We do see an early version of the Prime Radiant used for the first time and how Harry ended up at the university on Trantor. So the Empire has been keeping an eye on him for a lot longer than we've realised, and is a shadowy figure in the background following him around. They're so threatened by his work that Yana is kidnapped and they want the Prime Radiant in exchange for her. But he knows that she's already dead and works out that it's a trap, and using the system that he used earlier on in the episode as a kid, he kills Yana's murderer. And we find out that Harry's actually been primarily motivated by revenge all this time, it's just not something that we've realised up until now. But he still does end up on Trantor, and we see an old face that we haven't seen since the first few episodes of Season 1, Jiril, and I wondered if this guy would ever show up again. But yeah, it does seem that after Yana's death, one of Harry's primary motivations on going to Trantor was to take down the Empire, and this completely changes how we view his actions up until this point. Now, when it flashes back to the present, it does look as if live-action Harry is dead or about to die, but personally, I don't know if they're going to go down that road. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. We've seen that he can be resurrected once, and I hope they're not going to keep doing that, as it's probably going to get a little bit slow and a little bit repetitive. But if he does die and he is brought back, I think they're probably going to clear up how that can happen. We also catch up with Constance and Polly in this episode arriving on Trantor, and we see Constance awake from hypersleep. Remember, she's probably never had to do this as the Foundation ships are more advanced, and the spacers are certainly appearing to be more important. And this is the second spacer we've seen this season. The show hasn't really went into detail about them much, but establishes that they're human and they've been around for hundreds of years. The episode suggests that they're kind of slaves bred only for this, and I can see that this is going to play a bigger role going forward. Her and Polly talk about Trantor and the size and the scope of it, and she's never seen anything like this growing up on the Outer Reaches her entire life. So it kind of blows her mind because she knows that the Empire has to fall, but she can't really get her head round something this big being destroyed. But she does mention that she imagined it as a child, so is this her manifesting some sort of ability like Salvor and Gale? I honestly don't know. Polly tells her it's only a matter of time as the decay has already set in and people just haven't realised it yet. And we find out that the people of Trantor view the Outer Reach as lost barbarian worlds. Remember, Polly is a man with vices, so I can see him overindulging now that he's arrived in the capital, and he kinda does do that initially. But after a night on the town, he seems to want to clean up his act, and just as this is happening and we're getting a bit of clarity from the guy, Polly and Constant are snatched by the immigration people on Trantor, very similar to how Azura was snatched by the clones in Season 1. And speaking of the clones, we only really get one scene of them in this episode. But it is something that we haven't really seen before, which is them addressing the public and how the public reacts to them. So this is Brother Day essentially pitching his idea to break up the genetic dynasty and change the Empire by getting married to Seraph, who is going to become the first galactic empress in centuries. And he straight out says that he's ending the genetic dynasty there and then, and I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting that. And after he says this, it's all about reactions because there's Dawn, Dusk and Demerzel there, and there's a lot of tension up on that stage. And it only gets worse because after he's introduced Seraph and given his speech, she makes an impromptu speech and she really shakes things up here and is trying to get the people on her side. But yeah, the Cleons here, the division within the brothers has never been more apparent, and it's very interesting on what Demerzel is going to do next. There hasn't been too much focus on her the last few episodes as well, so I think we're probably going to get a flashback. Now, as I said, everyone's in this episode apart from Bel Rios, and it also picks up with Hobor Mallow seemingly arriving in the middle of nowhere, but it's exactly where he's supposed to be. And he even thinks he's in the wrong location before what I can only describe as a ship, but I'm not sure that's exactly accurate. It looks more alien and advanced than anything that we've seen before. And once he's inside, it looks kind of like a honeycomb or a beehive, or very similar to the inside of the Prime Radiant that we've seen earlier on in the show. But it's a ship full of spacers, so I guess this is where they're made, or where they're trained. And they're definitely going to be an important aspect in this show. It seems as if Harry wants to get the spacers on side, and that does make complete sense to me, but that's going to be in my next Foundation Theory video. Now, I know I didn't cover absolutely everything in this episode because there was a hell of a lot to cover. A lot of personal character motivations, a lot of things from the past, and a lot of things that are going to influence the future. But this is definitely my favourite episode of the season so far because it's focusing more on the characters rather than the general plot. And that's something that we haven't really had this season. Yeah, we've had personal conflicts between the clones and Seraph and between the trio and things like that, but we've never had any real deep exploration of these characters so far. And it did answer a lot of questions regarding Telm, Gale and Salvor that the fans have had over the last few weeks, or at least since the season has started as well. There's some real debate over what people's motivations and actions are going to be and what the long-term effects of those actions will be as well. And if I'm honest, I don't like the Mentalics as a device to tell the story. I think that they are kind of weak. Because I think the whole thing of constantly having to question people around you and question if what you're watching and if your motivation is real is going to get a little tiring sooner rather than later. So I hope that they move the story off the planet or away from the Mentalics. But at the same time, all this stuff is cementing where these characters are going to be going forward in the story. This season has focused more on the plan rather than the people involved in the plan, and this episode has really addressed that issue, and it goes in a totally opposite direction. We're learning more about their motivations, namely Harry, and I like the Empire scenes that we got with Seraph, dropping a bombshell in public and Day absolutely unable to do anything about it. The only thing I didn't like this week was the Hobor stuff felt a little bit crammed in, and they probably should have saved that for next week, but that's just me. But yeah, we got a lot of answers this week about Harry Seldon's motivation, his past, how the two Harrys work with the one on Terminus and the live action one, and I think there's going to be a lot more from the Terminus one next week, to be honest. But as always, these are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As I said, I'm going to be doing another Foundation Theory video in the next few days, so make sure you're subscribed and you've got the notifications turned on so you don't miss it. And as always, if you've made it this far, leave a like on the video. I completely understand people's criticisms of this season in the show up until this point, but I want to see how the season's going to end before I make my final decision, or make my mind up on if it is any good or not. I would like to see a little bit more of the first Foundation and find out what's going on Terminus over the last 100 years or so, but I doubt that we're really going to get that now that we're just over the halfway point. But as always, we're going to have to wait and see. And as always, my name's Al, thanks for watching. So we're coming to the final few episodes of Foundation Season 2, and last week really filled in a lot of the blanks when it came to Harry and the plan. Now this week catches up with everyone else and you can see how things are beginning to fit together. But before I get into it, as always, I'm Al, this is the Geek Get In Review, and I'm going to be talking about Foundation Season 2 Episode 7, so if you haven't seen it, this will contain spoilers. Also posted a theory video about what might happen this week with the spacers, and if you haven't seen that, I'd recommend giving it a watch before this. The link will be in the description and at the end of the video. But this week is really picking up the pace, plans are revealed, alliances are trying to be formed, and consequences for people's actions are happening. Now, before I get into this week's episode and my thoughts, you can watch an extended version of this video by becoming a channel member. I'll be posting more member exclusives as well as videos premiering early for members as well, so if you want to get early access and support the channel, this is your chance, and if you don't, that's okay, you can always subscribe for the cost of a click. Anyway, so the episode opens on Trantor picking up with Polly and Constant, who are being held by the Empire. Polly feels that they've let down Seldon, but Constant still has a little bit more faith, and I'll get to that later on. But Day and Demerzel are watching, and Day phrases how they've came to Trantor in a very interesting way.
Just as General Rios arrives in the Outer Reach reaches out.
But now the Empire know about the Church and Seldon's legacy. But Day's got more important things on his mind with his wedding. And he really does seem scared about what's going to happen. And when you think about it, Day is moving off the plan that was set up by the original Cleon when he created the dynasty. And he's having a little bit more than cold feet or pre-wedding day jitters. Seraph, his bride-to-be, is still relishing in the scene that she caused last week in public. Rue does warn her though not to embarrass Brother Day anymore because it could be a little bit risky. Demerzel shows up to take her for a final health check before any heirs to the Empire are produced. And we've been waiting for a face-off between these two for weeks, and Seraph outright tells Demerzel she knows that she's a robot. And we get a bit of a history on Demerzel here, at least more than we've ever got before. And crucially, she mentions the 3 robotic laws that Asimov is most famous for. She also says that as far as she knows, she's the only human form robot still in existence, and I think the phrasing of that is very important. As far as she knows, she's the only robot left, and I think you might want to remember that for later on in the season. She explains the original 3 laws that she was programmed with have been replaced by only one, and that's to serve the Empire. But we still don't know exactly what that means. Also, the first mention of the laws is a big massive deal if you're a fan of the books or a fan of Asimov as a whole, because that's kind of the thing that he's mostly known for. Because if Day gets what he wants, Demerzel is going to be on the sidelines for the first time in centuries. So Seraph still needs to make sure that she can give Day an heir and his new dynasty, otherwise this is all kind of pointless. And they want to harvest her side of the DNA before the marriage, which means that they aren't making kids the old-fashioned way, which I'm sure is more Day's choice than a practicality. And while all this is going on, Seraph outright drops the bomb that she knows about Demerzel and Day and doesn't mind. And she also doesn't mind saying it in public because I guess she knows that these doctors are going to get their memories wiped. We also find out that the clones are sterile, but this can be reversed by design, and that's going to be important later on. But while all this is happening, we get a much bigger showdown between the two, with Demerzel outright telling Seraph that her and Day are responsible for what happened to her parents. And this is the first time that we've seen Seraph really break down and show any real emotion about what's happened to her family. Day sees the effect that she had on the public last week when she spoke, and I think he's beginning to realise the benefit of her outside of just being a queen in a womb. But having had all her suspicions and worst fears confirmed, Seraph goes to meet Dawn, filling him in that she knows what's going on between his brother and Demerzel and what happened to her family. And she comes up with a pretty ingenious plan to give Day what he wants while also sort of usurping the throne. Because if she gets pregnant by Dawn and not Day, no one's going to be able to tell the difference, which is a pretty big stroke of genius. She's pitting brother against brother, and her having a child by Dawn would mean that he'd have a legacy and not brother Day, and that's a lot to think about. Plus, he doesn't have weird android sex, at least yet. But I do wonder, is Seraph being genuine in all this, or is she just manipulating Dawn? The way that she puts it is, this would be a bloodless coup, and if all goes to plan, she's right, it would be, but there's a lot of factors here that she's got to think about. Meanwhile, back on Ignis, Gale and Salvor are still unaware about what's happened to Harry, thinking that he's taken the beggar and left him on the planet. Salvor wants to leave as well, but Gale wants to stay to help to try and prevent the rise of the mule. And Salvor is really the odd one out in this episode, as she can't really read anyone and her abilities don't really seem to be as focused as they were. She can't see the future and she can't read minds. Tellum is still trying to get Gale on side and become the future of her people, and it really seems to be working. And while Salvor knows that something's not right, she can't really act on her feelings, as obviously a planet full of telepaths would be onto her. But we do get a better look at how this society and the people work and how they deal with and adapt to their abilities in everyday life. I won't get into detail, but imagine knowing what your food's thinking before you eat it, put it that way. Gale explains the threat of the mule to the people on the planet, and it's over a century away, she's still worried about what's going to happen. She also tells them about Harry and psychohistory and that mentalics aren't really accounted for in it, so there's no way that their behaviour can really be predicted. She wants them all to work to be a force for good after the Empire ends and to be prepared for the rise of the mule. But Salvor begins to realise that she's being manipulated and that the mentalics are hiding something from her. But Gale doesn't want her to do anything to jeopardise what she's trying to set up, because she's trying to do this to save Salvor in the future. So Salvor goes investigating on her own and finds the pit in Harry's body, so I guess he is dead after all, but it's not really 100% confirmed. And Tellum shows up and gives Salvor the same fate but leaves her face down in the water. So yeah, that's kind of shocking and I didn't expect that. I don't think they're going to kill Salvor. I think it might be revealed that Salvor is manipulating them somehow using her mind, or maybe Gale is. We're going to have to wait and see. But did you guys see that coming? Let me know in the comments below. Now, one of the big things that was teased last week and was kind of a mid-episode cliffhanger was Hobor the Spacers and his mysterious mission. And as I said, I have made a theory video on this, and I'm glad to say that some of the theories that I had in there did pan out. But anyway, he's on board the Spacer swarm ship, which apparently jumps at random, so they're kind of shocked that he showed up and knew they were going to be there. He tells him that he was sent by Harry and that the Foundation can synthesise the material that they need in order to survive and jump. And in my Spacer Theory video, I did sort of work out or guess that the Foundation would need to come up with a way to get rid of this dependence on Obelisk. So it turns out that they can make their own, so this is going to free the Spacers, in theory, from the Empire's control long term, and yeah, that's a big deal. And it isn't really a negotiation, it's more of a promise of what the Spacers can be if they side with the Foundation rather than Empire. Also, the Foundation tech makes Spacers irrelevant as they don't need them to jump. But the Spacers aren't particularly keen to rock the boat with the Empire and are worried about the reaction that they might have if they didn't need them anymore. In fact, they're so worried they contact the Empire straight away and arrange to meet up with Bel Rios to hand over Hobor, the Whisper Ship, and the Foundation technology. Now, if the Spacers can't see the potential of what Harry offers, Bel might. He knows that their technology is more advanced in some ways and wants to know how the Whisper ships work. But before he can interrogate Hobor, he unleashes Becky to get the upper hand and escapes, and they realise that the Whisper ships are even more advanced than they'd first thought. Bel fills in day about Hobor and what's happened, and the fact that the Foundation is now out there making moves, and he says that the fact that they're willing to do this means that they're a much bigger threat than the Empire has realised. But like the Spacers, Bel doesn't want to turn any of this knowledge or information against the Empire for fear of the consequences, but his husband sees the potential of what an alliance with the Foundation could be. But Bel makes a great point. If you get rid of the Cleonic dynasty, what exactly would replace it? Bad leadership is better than no leadership as he sees it, and as the Foundation isn't big enough to replace the Empire yet, if they were to fall, the chaos that the Foundation is trying to prevent would take over before anyone or anything could step in its place. Now, after all this has happened, back on Trantor, Polly and Constant are taken before the Dynasty, and Polly fills them in on what exactly the Foundation's been up to and what they want. He wants the Foundation to be recognised by the Empire, but Polly doesn't know about the Spacers and Hobor, and he's shocked when Day reveals all this and plays his hand. But it's Constant is the one that's hiding her hand here, or I should say Harry. Out that when Constant was in the vault, Harry placed a piece of his consciousness in her mind. And Harry appears right before the clones and lays out today that if you don't join us, we're going to have to fight you, and hey, we're all scientists and mathematicians, so we worked out that we're going to win. And Day reacts the way that you'd expect, or at least the way that you would expect the previous Brother Days to react. He orders an attack on the Foundation and all their technology to be seized for use by Empire. And then literally burns Harry out of Constant. And I'm glad to say that he doesn't kill her, because I really like Constant as a character, and 3 deaths this episode would be a little bit severe. So a lot happened this week, from Tellum seemingly killing Salvor to Empire learning how advanced the Foundation really is. It's now a threat to be eliminated rather than a rumour that they're just hearing about.
I've often wondered what you see while the rest of us are sleeping. All that we must be missing. What thoughts haunt you?
We're getting close to the end of Season 2 of Foundation, and even more than last week, the stories and characters are coming together. With huge setups, big reveals, and even bigger questions, Episode 8 is absolutely jam-packed. It's got action, plot twists, answers, and even more mystery. But before I get into it, I just want to say thanks for taking the time to choose to watch the channel. I really appreciate it, and if you haven't done it already, please subscribe, and if you make it all the way to the end of the video, leave a like as well. So this episode opens with Rue in Dusk, and he seems pretty infatuated with her. She also has some Shadow Master tech she shouldn't have, along with knowledge she also shouldn't have, and she outright tells him that the Dominion can counter the Empire's memory block. Dusk is understandably pretty shaken, and she lets him know she's been in charge the full time, kinda the same way that Seraph's been doing things with Day. But Dusk points out that that makes her a suspect in the attack, which we still haven't gotten to the mystery of. But the twist is, she's in Demerzel's bedroom. So it looks as if Seraph is out to get rid of her, or at least get more information on Demerzel. And if you've seen this episode, you know the last few minutes, that's what it's all about. And Rue tries to use Dusk's feelings in order to get this information, but he isn't giving anything away. In fact, he answers any question about Demerzel as if he's been programmed to, like an automatic response.
She will always be here, as she always has been.
Now, surprisingly to a lot of fans, we did have the laws of robotics explained earlier on in the season, but we get a lot of history here about what's happened between man and machine. The robots essentially outgrew their initial programming. An emperor was killed by a robot breaking one of the laws, which should be impossible, but again, evolution. So they were eventually all wiped out apart from Demerzel. As far as we know, she's the only one left at this point. But Dusk can't actually remember how Demerzel came to serve the Empire. Rue wants to run the memory tech on him to recover what's been going on, but before it can go any further, they're called to the execution of Polly and Constant. Now, I'm going to get back to Trantor in a minute, but I thought I'd focus on Tellum, Gale, and what's going on Ignis. So she straight up confesses to Harry's murder to Gale, but Gale knew it anyway because, telepaths. And Tellum sees how powerful Gale is and wants it on her side. And even though Tellum's pretty powerful, you can tell she's a little bit intimidated by Gale. Now, she's mentioned in a few episodes that her health isn't the best and Tellum does seem to be dying. And the big cliffhanger from last week about Salvor is resolved pretty much straight away. The kid that she's befriended, Josiah, who might be the mule, and I'll get to that later on, and she's being kept in the same type of cell that Gale is that dampens her ability. Because, as he puts it, we don't kill our own kind. Just imprison them indefinitely, I guess. But Harry, at least the live-action flesh and blood version, seems to be confirmed to be dead. So it's up to Salvor to get out and save the day. And she's got the other Prime Radiant that was on board the beggar connected to the vault, Harry. And she realises this because of what Harry said about quantum entanglement, and I'll get to that in a minute. But Salvor's able to connect to him and join him in the vault. She has to explain the whole Prime Radiant being linked, but Harry works it out as, he's a copy of himself and puts the whole thing together. All about Harry 2's other plan, the second foundation, what he should know, what he shouldn't. Again, he's a pretty smart guy no matter which version of him you get. Anyway, he helps Salvor overcome the tech that's dampening her ability, but doesn't guarantee that Terminus is going to survive the second crisis and the attack and the war that's on its way. Find out that Tellum is a lot older than she appears. She's basically been body hopping, so after about 50 or 60 years, once her current body's come to the end of the line, she takes over the next one, and in this case, she's got her sights set on Gale. And every time she does this, she seems to get more powerful as well. So it could indicate that Tellum is the mule, maybe. And if she doesn't get Gale, she could take over the child that we've seen, Joseph. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below if you think that that's a possibility. But while she's in the vault, Salvor tells Harry about Gale's vision and Hobor Mallow and the role that he's going to play. So this is the plot twist, and this has sort of divided fans. A lot of people think that the scenes with Harry in the vault are happening at a different time. That's why you knew how to ask for Hobor Mallow. But if you're asking me, if you're going into the laws of quantum entanglement, it means that you can influence the vault at any point in its existence, and I suppose the Prime Radiant as well. So if it does all happen at the same time, this is how he's able to spell out the name Hobor Mallow seemingly in the past, although it's his present, but it's also kind of the future. I'm going to go into it more on the live stream this week. Now, one thing that's been missing a lot this season, if you ask me, is Terminus itself, or at least focus on what the Foundation's been up to. And we see basically the heads of the Foundation, including Constance's dad, who's readying his people to watch the execution broadcast, because remember, that's his daughter, and Day wants to get his message across. Now, Day, of course, gives it his own unique spin to sell these executions, which are getting broadcasted all over the galaxy. He gives a speech about his history with Harry Seldon, or more accurately, he spins it to see his point of view. That the Foundation teamed up with the same people who attract Trantor and the Starbridge in Season 1, i.e. the Anacreans and the Thespins. And in typical Brother Day style, it's a very grim death or a very grim fate that Polly and Constant are facing with getting their heads chopped off. His fleet's on the way to Terminus to wipe out the Foundation, and again, Day being Day makes Seraph decide who's going to die first, Polly or Constant. And you can tell that this is a real test. After she put him on the spot a few episodes ago, he's now doing the same. But before anything can happen, Hobor jumps in using the Whisper Ship to save them effectively, and also effectively starting the war with the Empire, and literally fucking everyone up that's there. And as I said, this is getting broadcast to hundreds, if not thousands, of planets, so it shows how much of an advantage the Foundation has, as he's just pulled the Empire's pants down for a sound spanking, and literally taken a chunk out of Day. Hobart manages to get Constant on board the ship, but Polly's left behind, and sadly, Becky doesn't make it either. Now, Bell obviously is watching the execution, and it's been mentioned in the last few episodes that he could potentially swap sides or at least betray the Empire, and now that he's seen that someone can draw blood and get away with it, you can tell that he's a little bit more on the fence on this. Constant and Hobart arrive back at Terminus just as the fleet's there, and the Foundation are preparing to be attacked. Constant wants to get down with Hobart before it all ends, because she's mentioned that at pretty much every encounter with him. But somehow, using the mark that the Spacers left, Bell is able to locate them, and we don't really get any much more than that on it. But on the planet itself, Harry reveals himself to Constant's dad, and we finally get an insight into this guy. He doesn't seem to be a true believer like the others. He's a bit more of an admin guy, and maybe that's why Harry reacts the way that he did when they met in the vault. And he's not happy that his daughter is just seen as part of the equation to Harry, and this is something that keeps getting brought up this season, that Harry doesn't see people as individuals. But back on Trantor, Day is on his way to Terminus with Polly on board, and you can tell that he's trying to get a new handle on where the Foundation's at, and as far as Day's concerned, the war's already begun. But he's definitely looking for an angle out of Polly in order to get an edge towards the initial confrontation with Harry. Rue sees that the clones are coming apart and warns Seraph again about the game that she's playing and how it could end if she doesn't come out on top. So we're seeing the fractures on Seraph's side now as well as on the clones. But Seraph is still doubling down on this and is still trying to work the Dawn angle, and it seems that he's on board with her plan. But I wonder, is he playing her long term? Because, again, we've already seen one of the Dawns caught out by a woman in Season 1, and I don't know if they're going to fall for the same trick. He seems to be on her side and doesn't want Day raising the kid that he's going to have with Seraph, so it seems initially that he's quite happy to get his brother out of the way. But he's also worried about Day, Dawn and Demerzel and how they're going to react if his betrayal's discovered. Now, later on in the episode, Dusk pays Rue a visit to take her to the mural as he's realised what's wrong with it. It's been hiding a secret all this time, and it's a passage that no Cleon has ever found before. Once they get to the bottom of the passage, there's a message from the original Cleon telling Dusk that this is all a prison, and it's revealed that the clones aren't Cleon's legacy or his empire, and that it's Demerzel who's been in charge all along. And this has been a kind of theory that's been developed all the way going back to Season 1. So although we know what's going on with Demerzel now, we still don't know why she's in that position or who put her there. I guess this does explain what's going on with the clone memories, but there's still quite a lot of ground to cover and quite a lot of gaps to fill in. And it also puts everything that we've seen with Demerzel into a new light going back to Season 1 as well. But the second crisis has sort of begun. If not, it's definitely going to happen before the end of this season. Another thing that we still don't know is how flesh and blood Harry came to be before he met his unfortunate demise at the hands of Tellum, and I really hope they address that before the end of the season. Now, if you missed it last week, I'm doing a weekly Foundation stream every Sunday, and I'm going to put the times on screen now. And we've got a lot to chat about this week. That's why this episode is a little bit shorter than my usual reviews. So I hope you can make it along and we can discuss some theories, because I went on for just over 2 hours last week, and man, I had a lot of fun doing it. Week left us with a bit of a cliffhanger ending with who and what Demerzel is. And this week we get a lot of backstory on her, as well as what might happen with the future of the Foundation as well. If you haven't guessed, I'm talking about Foundation Season 2, Episode 9. So if you haven't seen it, this will contain spoilers. And as always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review. So Season 1 was criticised for being a little slow-paced, and Season 2 has definitely addressed that concern and upped the game in the pace of the show. We've only got one episode left this season, and they cram a lot in this week. So let's get to it, but before that, just to say, thanks for taking the time to choose to watch this video. I really appreciate it, and if you haven't done it already, please subscribe to the channel, and if you make it all the way to the end, leave a like as well. So, this episode opens up giving us the backstory in Demerzel that we've all been waiting for, going all the way back to Trantor over 600 years ago, to the original Cleon, and at the youngest point that we've ever seen him. And this was before he was Empire, when his mother and father were ruling the galaxy. So his parents were the last of the old rulers before the clones took over. We see him, like his future brother would, taking in the mural where Dusk and Rue find the secret passage, and that's exactly what happens to him. So this passage has been around for thousands of years, even at this point. But the twist is, he doesn't find, himself in there, because he's the first version of him. Or the original version, I should say. What he finds is Demerzel, or at least Demerzel in her component parts, but she's still fully conscious. And she's been here hanging on this stories to tell and seems to be detailing the robotic wars over the years. And she even mentions Earth, which, as I've said in previous videos, at this point in the future, humans consider it the way that we think of Atlantis or the Garden of Eden. It's more a myth or a sort of abstract concept to them. And this goes on for years until he reaches Dawn's age. She says that she's 18,000 years old at this point and has had many names and faces, and all I'm going to say is remember that going forward. Now, over the years, Cleon debates putting her back together, but he's got other things on his mind. His mother's died and he's about to step up to the throne. And we see that he's not that keen on being emperor, as he sees it as a sort of box or a trap that he's being forced into. At this point, he's reached Brother Day's age, and we find out kind of how Demerzel came to be in this state. She was caught after losing a big battle, so I guess she was on the front lines of the robotic wars, and the Emperor at the time left her like this, so she contains all the information to make more robots. And again, I think that's going to be a very important part in the Foundation show. And even in this sort of early version, she really eggs on Cleon and feeds his ego. But he's conflicted, so eventually, after years, he reassembles her and kind of lets her go. I mean, she's still trapped in the cell. So after thousands of years, she's sort of free, but at least she's got her body back. She tells him more stories of the past in order to lure him in, and she's been there for 5,000 years, so a human lifetime is nothing to her when you think about it, and she basically says that at a few points throughout this episode. While the story's getting told, Cleon ages to Dusk's age, and he still hasn't gotten married or had children, so there's no clear line of succession, and I think you can all work out where this is going. He shows her that he's found some relics from Earth, and it's the tools that she uses to repair herself that we've seen in previous episodes and seasons, and then he finally frees her. He gives her the freedom to override her programming, as this Cleon is obsessed with her as Day is in the present Foundation storyline. But he limits her so she can harm anyone but him, and she can't leave her body, so he sort of puts a leash on her and she's not very happy about it. He explains his plan for the dynasty and it needs her to make sure it works, so he's bound her to the role of Empire exactly the same way that he's bound to it, so I guess that they're both prisoners. So despite all their power and their virtual immortality, neither any Cleon or Demoiselle has the freedom that they appear to have. And we find out that this is the version of Cleon that Dusk and Rue found that's been narrating all this, and Dusk tells him about Day's plans to end the dynasty before he imprisons them, so they are trapped in the same cell that Demoiselle was in all those centuries ago. Now, the big other cliffhanger from last week was Gale potentially losing her body, and this episode picks up where the ceremony's still going on and Tellum's still trying to get control. Salvor uses the devices that were dampening her ability to disrupt what's going on in the ceremony and free Gale, which I thought was a pretty smart and also pretty obvious idea, and I was kind of pissed off that it didn't occur to me. But she does manage to free her and they go on the run, and they realise that the beggar is still on the planet because Harry hasn't taken it. Salvor gives Gale the Prime Radiant and holds them off while Gale gets on board, but Tellum is better there. And obviously she's after the Prime Radiant for her own means. And we see Tellum try to manipulate Gale. Being Tellum, she uses visions of Gale's father and also Salvor's death against her. They both jump into the future and see the mule, and I think this is a bigger deal than it's getting made out to be in this episode, but that's for another video. Salvor manages to get back on board the ship and saves Gale from Tellum, just as Harry, yes, the live-action Harry that we thought was dead all those episodes ago, shows up and takes care of Tellum in a way that I can't really show on YouTube. So an absolutely massive twist. Now, I thought we would get a live-action Harry back, but I thought they would have to go back to Una's world and speak to Callie to get another copy of him. But it seems that he is still alive, but I suppose that depends on what your definition of life is. And again, I've got a lot of thoughts of this that I'm going to make another video on, so subscribe to make sure that you don't miss out. So last week left off with Bel Rios's fleet orbiting Terminus while Day was on his way to meet him along with Polly in hand. The fleet is still waiting to attack and they're going to get the Invictus ready for the defence of Terminus. Constant and Hobart meet Bel and Hobart's body swapping device tech comes into play, which I think might get used later on because it doesn't come up in this episode. Bel asks Hobart why he attacked Trantor, and Hobart explains he's actually starting to believe in Harry's plan. And he makes a great comparison that both him and Bel follow dead men, and yeah, there's a lot of parallels in this show, and I keep seeing them pop up. Constant thinks this is all part of Harry's plan to help change Bel's mind and swing things in their direction. And Constant points out that for all the ground the Foundation's taken in the Outer Reach, they haven't had to fight or spill blood for it, unlike the Empire. And when Day arrives, they're still planning the attack. They detect the Invictus in orbit and decide to talk rather than an outright fight. And Day really wants to make a spectacle of all this, which makes Bel even more nervous that he's not going to instantaneously attack. He goes down to the planet and meets Director Cermak, Constant's dad, and he offers Polly as a gift to prove his good faith before asking for the Foundation's surrender. And Day is really interested in what they've been up to. He wants to see the church that they've built, and the population's reaction to him is very, very interesting. Remember, none of these people have ever been to Trantor, and this guy is as much as a myth to them as Harry is. Day puts them on the spot and confronts them about the real work that they've been up to all these years, and seeing how they've spread the word of the church throughout the galaxy. And he sees them more as an armed cult, and the real danger that they actually pose, but the Foundation treats a lot of the technology that the Empire keeps in their own hands as if it's nothing. He kills the director and orders the death of everyone apart from the scientists and heads to the vault to meet Harry. And when they do, this gets very interesting. They kind of hint at it, but they don't specifically say it. But Harry seems to know or has a rough idea of what and who Demoiselle is. He takes both of them into the vault and reminds Day that no matter what, the fall is coming and that it's an absolute fact. And also the fact that Day's here means that it's happening already, because the Cleons that we've met previously wouldn't put this much effort into trying to negotiate peace. But you can tell this version of Day has spent a lot of time thinking and studying Harry Seldon. He thinks that he's the exception to Harry's plan as he's breaking the genetic dynasty, but Harry says that this isn't enough. And this is where it kind of gets a little bit shocking. Harry offers the Prime Radiant to Demerzel as he says that she'll understand it and can help guide humanity. Day's not having this and wants Harry to admit that he was wrong and walk back all the work that's been done with the Foundation, and Harry appeals to Demerzel that she can be the one to save them all. And I think there's a lot going on in this episode, but this is a key significant scene, and it kind of details elements of Harry Seldon's plan that most people wouldn't have already considered. But while this is all going on, the attack's getting ready in space. Before Bell can board the Invictus, it activates ready to defend Terminus. Bell attacks with almost no effect straight away as the Whisper ships arrive to support it. He launches his own fighters against them, and it all gets a bit of attack on the Death Star from Star Wars. But as always, this looks great, and they're finally seeing what the Foundation's capable of. They manage to break through the Invictus's defences and get a few big hits in, but this is at the cost of Bell's husband, who we don't see die, but he crashes on the planet. Day orders Bell to take the Invictus out the sky, effectively crashing it into the planet and destroying the Foundation just as he leaves the vault. He also, once he's back on board the ship, takes Constant and Hobart to the bridge to watch the destruction. But before this, Demerzel has a moment and says that she's been called away for more important matters. So I guess that this is Dusk and Rue stuck in the prison back on Trantor, but it's not really confirmed. And she basically tells Day exactly what she thinks of him and who he is, and this really seems to be the thing that's going to break the guy. But he does fire on the Invictus, crashing it into Terminus and the Foundation and his husband, as we see the people on the planet watch as it falls towards them. So it all seems to be coming to an end on Terminus for the first Foundation just as this episode ends with a huge firestorm, and Day has seemingly won, at least for the moment. And that's pretty much where the episode ends. And there's so much going on here, it's absolutely insane. I thought this episode might all be Demerzel's backstory, and we got a lot more than that. I could probably just do a series of videos on the opening scene of this episode on its own, but the rest of the episode was completely solid. We got some great action, some great setup, a lot of things going on here, and a lot of things that we hadn't expected. We've still got one episode to go, and the Foundation seems like it's really down and out. But remember, in episode 8, Salvor asked Harry if Terminus would survive the crisis, and he didn't answer her, so I guess he has anticipated that this might happen. We also get the live action Harry back, and as I said, I've got a few ideas about what's going on there and what to expect, so look forward to more theory videos this week as well. But as always, these are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think in the comments below. If you're a new subscriber to the channel, thanks for joining us. I'm going to do a live stream this Sunday. I'll put the times up on screen, and I hope that you can all join me there. So we're finally at the end of Foundation Series 2, and Episode 10 had a lot of questions and a lot of setup to fulfill. And yeah, like this episode brought it all together, answered a few questions, left a few more mysteries, and created a few more as well. So, if you've not seen Foundation Series 2 Episode 10, this will contain spoilers, but as always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review, so let's get to it. But just before we do that, just to say thanks for taking the time to choose to watch this channel. I really appreciate it, and if you haven't done it already, please hit subscribe, and if you make it all the way to the end, leave a like on the video as well. So the episode opens with a Gale monologue talking about the questions kids ask their parents. And this isn't the first time that we've had one of these. In fact, they usually bookend the Foundation's first and last episode. Then we see Harry coming back to life in the water, cut with picking up where they left off on the beggar with Telling Bond's death. And it turns out that Gale felt Harry drown, seemingly saving him and sort of taking over his body to escape. So, suck it who people said it was Imperial nanobots that were keeping him alive. So this is how he got round the whole Tell mind reading thing, I suppose. Or I should say, how they got round Tell him. And it was never Harry's corpse in the water at all, it was just Gale making people at Salvor and Tellum think that it was him all the time. So I guess this kind of explains it and brings Harry and Gale closer together than ever before, after seemingly being at odds throughout the entire season after landing on Ignis. So for almost 3 episodes they were working together without anyone's knowledge, and I know this explanation won't please a lot of fans, but I'll get to that in a minute. Because they are still trapped on Ignis with a planet full of people who can mess with your mind, and Harry just killed their leader. But they seem to have quickly changed their tune with Tellum's death as she was controlling them all along. So he now has a great giant planet full of telepaths that owe him a favour, and the young kid, Josiah, could still be the mule, or Tellum could still have jumped bodies, but that's coming up in a little bit. Once they've made peace with the locals, Harry does ask how old Tellum could be. All the while, the boy Josiah's in shot, so is he in her, or are they going to become the mule? That was the big question I had while I was watching this. If you watched my live streams over the weekend, I did say that they've got a body swapping telepath without a body, so maybe she could jump into another person's body, one of her followers on the planet, and that's exactly what's happened. So she's taken over Josiah's body and he tries to kill Gale, but Salvor stops him getting shot in the process. So I guess he's not the mule after all, but Tellum could still be. It's sort of left open if she is still out there. There's no way to know if she jumped into someone else's body, really. But Salvor, as I said, took the hit for Gale and dies in her arms. Before she dies, Salvor says that this proves that the future can be changed, as it's going against the vision that they both seen, so now the plan can get back on course, but at what cost? And they do kind of address this later on in the episode. They have a funeral for Salvor and her sacrifice, but as I keep saying, you've got to focus on what this show focuses on, and it does focus on this one girl who keeps appearing, and she's in a few of the shots the last time that we see Ignis as well. So is Tellum dead? I'm going to do a video on that in the coming week, so make sure you're subscribed and you've got notifications turned on so you don't miss it. Gale and Harry talk about how in order to save the masses, individuals must die, and they need to learn to deal with that, and that the losses lead them to wins in the end. And he assures her that the plan can still work. Harry wants Gale to go back into hibernation and sleep while he stays behind to train and build the second foundation with the telepaths. He says that she'll wake up once a year to check on the progress of the plan, so in effect she's becoming the sort of Vault Harry to these guys on Terminus. But one question that they don't answer is, how did Harry originally come back into flesh and blood? If this plan did go ahead, would Harry age? We still don't know what he is. Yet. But she convinces her to join him in the long sleep, so I guess he's also the Vault Harry to them as well, I suppose. Anyway, they're both left to sleep until they're to be woken up next, and I guess they're going to pop up eventually and maybe things haven't gone to plan. And one of the last scenes that we see before they drift off to sleep is the girl that stares at them intently, so I'm guessing if Tellum isn't anyone, she might be in her. Now on Trantor, Demerzel is back to take care of the Dust and the Rue situation. And she knows what Cleon's told them, and Dusk is upset she's really the power all along behind the Empire. Demerzel points out it's a sort of what you won't know won't hurt you scenario, and she tells him her version of events, that Cleon was sort of deluded into doing all this in the first place. She remembers the boy that she met, not the man that chained her to this for eternity. She points out that she's never really been free thanks to the directive that Cleon gave her, and Rue wants the wedding to proceed to end the dynasty, and Dusk wants to reprogram her, neither of which she said would work and that she'd kill them if they tried to attempt reprogramming her. So I guess that's a defence Cleon put in, and it's a pretty big one when you think about it. Not even he or another one of his clones can reverse the directive that he's put in. So I do wonder in the future how they're going to get round that. But the big reveal in this is that she's behind the attack that we've seen in episode 1, and that's been hanging over the season since, well, episode 1, and it was the very first scene that we've seen her and Day in season 2. And she's been thinking about this long term because she arranged the attack to frame Seraph for it. And it turns out that the Queen-to-be isn't going to make it down the aisle. She's taken into custody straight away and framed for this. Demerzel didn't want Day dead, she just wanted Seraph framed. Rue says they can always wipe everyone's memories, but as Seraph's people can now undo that and reverse it, Demerzel can't let them live. She knows about Dawn and Seraph too, but there's a great mirror here of episode 9 when Dust tells Demerzel that he forgives her before accepting his fate, and she quietly walks out of the cell and we don't see them again. And you can really see doing this actually bothered her, and it's not the only time in this episode it happened. Dawn doesn't take Seraph's arrest well, and Demerzel tells her fate's in Day's hands. She explains that this restores order, and Dawn notices a mark on her neck that Dusk previously mentioned to him, and it means betrayal. So he doesn't know yet, but he's got an idea not to trust her. Seraph is held awaiting Day's return when Dawn breaks in and frees her. Demerzel is monitoring what's going on Terminus with the fleet as Dawn is making a public announcement about the death of Day and now how he's going to marry Seraph. But it's all a ruse using the face scramblers that we've seen in earlier episodes. Dawn contacts her on the ship saying he knows about Dusk and Rue. She says her programming will force her to hunt them both down and that a new Dawn is going to be birthed. So Dawn and Seraph will be on the run and a new threat to Empire, I guess, along with her child. And again, you can see that she's conflicted at having to obey her directive and hunt him down and kill him. But Demerzel decants the replacement clones, all 3 at once, which does seem weird, and she does mention that this is the first time she's actually had to do 3 at once. And we see how she's actually controlling them in a more literal sense, literally programming them once they've emerged. She then shows them the Prime Radiant and says that they've got work to do. Day asks if she can understand it, and she says not all of it, but yet she can read enough that she knows that some things are coming, and she says this with a bit of a smile on her face. So, going back to Terminus, Day's fleet is still in orbit of the now ravaged planet, basking in his glory, having destroyed the Foundation. He orders the fleet to jump, but not home to Trantor. He wants to seek out other worlds the Foundation has influence on and destroy them. He makes Constant list them all before saying he's going to destroy them, starting with her home planet, or at least where one of her parents is from, Thespis. Bell isn't on board with this and tries to convince Day he's already won, but Day wants to wipe out every planet that they've touched. Bell tells him that going to all-out war will cause the fall that he's trying to avoid, as it's an unnecessary massacre, and refuses Day's order. Which I guess is why Demerzel made sure that Bell was on board. She wanted him to do this and stand up to him. Day orders the spacer to jump the ship after Bell refuses the order of Thespis, and we haven't had much on the spacers in the last few episodes, so it seems as if they still have a role to play. And they play it here. The spacer has caused a chain reaction to wipe out the fleet in orbit of what's left of Terminus, and Constant realises that this has all been part of Harry's plan using Hobor. The mark on his arm was to basically signal to cause all this, so Harry was relying on this attack to take down Day, and Day really gets his arse handed to him by Bell when they start fighting. And it's also very telling that the guards just stand there and watch while they're going at it throughout the corridors of the ship. But Bell, with now nothing to lose because his husband has passed away, does give Day a pretty solid run for his money before Day throws him in the airlock and spaces him out. But twist upon twist, Bell activates the wristband that Hobor used earlier on in the season and switches positions with Day, so it's Day that gets spaced and not Bell. And I mentioned in my previous review that they did focus on these and that they probably would be back. And I generally did see this coming once they started fighting. It was just a matter of how they were going to get there. Fleet is still about to be wiped out and there's only one way off the ship, but for only one person, so is it going to be Hobor or Constant? Hobor sees his mission as being over, whereas hers is just beginning. She's a true believer in the faith and the Foundation and has been all her life. So she takes the escape pod, leaving Bell and Hobor on board to contemplate their fate and decisions, and drink some of the wine that we've seen Hobor carry about all this season. Now, we don't really see them actually get destroyed, so they might be back, but it does appear as if they're. Constant is drifting in the pod, and we see her running out of air and supplies when she drifts towards a massive version of the vault in space. She boards it, and on board finds Polly, who you know was dead because he was on the planet that got destroyed, and he explains that everyone has survived the destruction of Terminus by hiding in the vault. So, the destruction of Terminus was always part of Harry's plan. Like I said in a previous video, Harry plans to win the war, not the battle, so sometimes he doesn't mind, and sometimes he finds it necessary to lose. So everyone that you've seen die at the end of episode 9 is still alive inside the vault, but they don't specify if they're literally all alive and walked in, or this is some sort of copy of them, the way the Hall Harry or Vault Harry's a copy of the original version. So they could be copies, I guess. But we see all those people and it's hard to tell. They did point out earlier on in the season saying that the Vault could manufacture and make food, so they might all be flesh and blood, I guess. But I want to know what you guys think. Are the people in the Vault all directly alive, as in they walked through in the door to stay there and be protected from the blast? Or are they some sort of copies like Harry? Let me know in the comments below. And that's kind of where the episode ends, apart from the fact we get a time jump to 152 years later. We see the mule who's talking about the dreams he's had about Gale, and he knows that she's still out there. So he's on a quest to find her before she finds him and get his evil plan back on track, I guess. But this goes back to what I've been saying all along since they had the visions. Do they create the mule by seeing the visions and then, you know, it's a paradox kind of scenario, or was this always going to happen? I really hope that they clear this up in Season 3. Although the time jump is to 152 years, it doesn't say it specifically if that's where Season 3 is going to get set up or where it's going to end up. We've still got the Dawn and Seraph and Demerzel stuff solved, so we've got to see how that ends, so I don't think we're going to get a straight 152 year jump, but you know how this show likes to play with time. Now, as always, I'm going to be doing a series of breakdown videos on this episode and Season 2, so if you aren't subscribed, make sure you are so you don't miss it. But this was an absolutely jam-packed finale, and I know that not a lot of explanations are going to leave fans happy. We still need to know how Harry came back. How he was saved, I don't know how I feel about that. I think I'm going to have to let it rest for a few days and see how it lands. I definitely think Telem Bond is probably still out there, but I'm more interested in what's going to happen with Empire and how Demerzel is going to deal with the whole Rogue, Dawn, Seraph and Child situation. As I said, I've got more videos planned on this, and as always, I'm going to be doing a stream this Sunday for the final episode of Foundation. We had an absolutely brilliant time last week and a lot of theories, and I know the show is over, but we're still going to chat about it and have theories and fun. In fact, I might even call it Foundation. No, I won't, because that sounds terrible. So I'd love it if you join me this Sunday. I'll put the times up on screen. As I said, I'm going to be doing a series of breakdown and theory videos for the remainder of the season, probably for the next week or so, so make sure you've got the notifications turned on so you don't miss it. But as always, this is just my point of view. I want to know what you guys think about everything that happened in this finale. I know there was a lot going on, but I really want to hear your thoughts. And as always, my name's Al. Thanks for watching.